Brené Brown, author of the #1 New York Times bestsellers Daring Greatly and The Gifts of Imperfection, joins us again at the summit. A recent summit favorite, Brené will share with us insights from her newest book, Rising Strong. Brené is a research professor in social work at the University of Houston. She has spent the past 13 years studying vulnerability, courage, worthiness, and shame. Since her first TED Talk went wildly viral, she has become a sought-after conference speaker, blogger, and author. In her latest book, Brené tells us what it takes to get back up after failure and teaches us how owning our stories of struggle and heartbreak give us the power to write a daring new ending. Please welcome Brené Brown back to the summit.
I am going to tell you a story that I think moves me through all of my work over the last 15 years. It's a story about vulnerability, it's a story about shame, it's a story about rising strong, it's a story about love, relationships, and it's a story that holds inside of it, for me, everything that's sacred also about being a leader. So this story happened a couple of summers ago, when my husband Steve and I decided that we were going to pool all of our vacation days and take a big Mongo vacation over the summer and rent a lake house at Lake Travis in Austin, Texas. Hook 'em horns to the one person who said that. I'm right there with you. So we were really excited about this vacation. I'm particularly excited because Lake Travis, I spent every summer of my life on this lake. It's where I learned to run a trot line, catch perch, shoot a BB gun, set a table, it's where I learned how to do everything. And so I couldn't wait to share this magic with Steve and my kids. So Steve and I had this very serious parenting meeting before we leave, where we're like, look, this is a 2-week vacation. There's got to be some rules around this. Like, we can't just go on vacation like we sometimes do for a long weekend and let the kids run wild around technology and bedtimes. They'll be feral by the time we get home. And so we have this big plan that we're going to have bedtimes, limited screen time, we're going to cook every night, and we're going to have a healthy vacation. The goal was to come back in better shape than when we left. Y'all are supposed to say, of course. So this house that we rented is on a deep water cove in Lake Travis, and to get across the cove is about 500 yards. So Steve and I, in our planning, decide that we are going to swim this cove every day of our vacation, 1,000 yards, 500 there, 500 back. Well, Steve and I met coaching swimming. We're both ex-competitive swimmers. Steve still swims. I am a shame researcher. But that's okay, because I got, I felt some courage. So I went and bought a Speedo. Little sticker shock, because it was the first time, this time in Lake Travis was going to be the first time we'd been in the water together for 25 years. We've been together a very long time. So one morning, and we invited my whole family. So my parents are married and divorced and remarried. Steve's parents are divorced and remarried. There's 8 grandparents, 4 sets. I'm the oldest of 4. Steve's got a brother. We invite everyone, and we say, look, you can come anytime. Here are the 2 weeks we're going to be there. It's going to be a healthy vacation. Call ahead. We'll tell you what to bring for groceries. They're like, sounds fun, can't wait. So one morning, everyone's asleep. My sisters are visiting. We leave the kids up at the house. We walk down this long stairway to the dock, and we dive in. And we start swimming across. And we get about halfway across, and we stop to look for boats and look around. And he's about, 15 feet, like us, right here. We're about this far apart from each other. I am overwhelmed by the sheer majesty of this moment, of this place that has been so important to me. So I look at Steve and I say, I feel so connected to you. I'm so glad we're doing this. And he looks back at me and he says, yeah, water's good. And he keeps going. So my first thought, and I know you're going to think this is arrogant, but my first thought is, he is so overwhelmed with emotion that he doesn't know what to say back to me. Like, that poor guy. Because in our marriage, it'd be much more likely that Steve would say that to me than I would say that to Steve, because he's a braver person than I am. And so I was like, wow, I don't know what's happening. So we keep swimming and we get to the other side, and he's kind of taking off, and I get in, and this time we're 2 feet, we're this far from each other. And so my theory about water in the ear, emotional overwhelm, that's all cleared up because we're really close now. So I look back at him and I say, hey, I just want to tell you, it's so beautiful here, and I'm so grateful that we decided to spend this time together and do this. I feel really close to you. And he looked back at me and he said, yeah, water's good. And he keeps swimming. Let me ask you this. How many men in here know how this story ends? No, really. No, like, this is not a rhetorical question. Raise your hand if you're a guy in here and you know how this story ends. Right. So I am now fueled through the water by simply rage. And I'm swimming. And I know exactly how the story ends. This is the gift of midlife. The gift of midlife is that you can play the tape to the end. We'll get back to the house, we'll dry off on the dock, we'll walk up the long stairs, we'll get into the kitchen, he'll look at me and he'll say, hey babe, what's for breakfast? And I'll say, I don't know, babe. Let me ask the breakfast fairy. Oh, breakfast fairy. Breakfast fairy. What's for breakfast this morning, breakfast fairy? And then I'll look at Steve and I'll say, oh, I'm sorry, Steve, I forgot how vacation works. I forgot that I'm in charge of breakfast and lunch and dinner and groceries and goggles and bug spray and towels and packing and unpacking and laundry. I forgot how our vacation works. This is uncomfortable laughter. Okay, I'm being vulnerable and honest, right? Let me just see a show of hands of how many of you relate to this story or this has ever happened in your life. Right. The worst thing about my tirade with the breakfast fairy is that somewhere halfway through it, Steve will go like this. Did something happen? And then the 24 to 48 hour Cold War begins. And I will win because I'm meaner. But it's not great for me, it's not great for my kids, it's not great for the people around us, it's uncomfortable, it's awkward, and it's eggshelly. And I don't know about you, but I grew up around a lot of eggshelly. I don't like eggshelly. So I'm like, this is not going to happen. So I get back to the dock, 5 strokes ahead of him, but not that I was counting. And he gets back, and he's pulling himself out of this little rickety old ladder on the dock, and I say, Steve, can you get back in the water for a second? So it's 30 feet at this dock, so we're like treading water, and he lets him, he lowers himself back in the water. And I say, what's going on? I'm trying to connect with you, and you're blowing me off. And he looks at me and he goes, I don't really want to do this with you right now. And of course I immediately go into, whoa, like this is where I'm going to be when I realize we're getting a divorce. Like, I'm like, what? And he said, I don't want to have this conversation with you right now. And I was like, oh, tough. I'm editing a lot. I'm editing tons. You have no idea how much I'm editing. So I said, tough. I said, that's too bad. I'm struggling here. I'm trying to connect with you. You're blowing me off. What is going on? And he turns in the water, and then he turns back, and he said, are you being vulnerable? And I was like, I am, but I'm right on the edge of rage. So what you say next matters. And he's just wobbling there. And so I don't know what to do next. And then I remember this sentence that came up for me over and over and over, especially the last 6 years of my research. It is a sentence that I heard from, especially around researching Rising Strong. I focused a lot on leaders, veterans, active duty military, creatives, did a lot of interviewing in that area. And this sentence kept coming up over and over, and I was desperately reaching for something to say to Steve right now. And so here's what I want you to do. This is a request I have of you. I'm gonna ask that everyone take a deep breath and not laugh at what I say next, because it could sound funny, but it's not. It wasn't for me at the time, because what is the emotion that we feel when we make a bid for connection and that bid is pushed away? What is the affect or emotion that comes up for us when that happens? Any ideas? So anger is what we call a secondary emotion, meaning it always covers something. Not good enough. Shame. Shame's what, right? When we reach out to connect with someone and they push us away. So I'm in deep shame when I say this. So I look at Steve, and here's the sentence that has changed my life, my marriage, my parenting, and my leading. And let me tell you, leading is one of the toughest things I do. I looked at Steve and said, I'm trying to connect with you and you're blowing me off. The story I'm making up right now is one of two things happened. You either looked over at me while we were swimming and you thought, she's old. Like, she's old. She doesn't even swim freestyle anymore. Like, what happened? Or you looked over at me and you thought, she does not rock a Speedo like she did 25 years ago. That's what I'm making up right now. And Steve's like, do we have to have this conversation? I said, yeah, no, we're like, look, I'm talking, you're listening, you're talking, I'm listening, we're having this conversation. What is going on? And there was this horrible silence for it would seem like forever. And he looked back at me and he said, I don't mind taking care of the kids. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I don't mind taking care of the kids. I know you don't get to hang out with your sisters. I don't mind taking all 5 of the kids back and forth across this cove all day long because that's where their hidden treasure is. I don't mind doing that. And I was like, okay, Steve, now I'm freaking out. What is happening? And he looked at me and he said, I don't know what you were saying to me this morning because I was trying to stave off the worst panic attack of my life when I was swimming. So I don't know what you were saying, I was just counting strokes. And I was like, what's happening? And he said, look, I had a dream last night that I had all 5 of the kids, and we were in the middle of the lake, and a ski boat was coming, and we were doing this, and the ski boat didn't slow down, and it didn't slow down, and I knew it would kill us if it hit us. So I grabbed all 5 of the kids and went as deep as I could go for as long as I could, waiting for that boat to go on top of us, just waiting and waiting. And I knew I couldn't go up. I knew we would be killed. And at some point, I looked over at Charlie, who was our son, who was 7 at the time. And I knew that if Charlie stayed underwater for 5 more seconds, he would drown. So I don't know what you were saying to me. I don't know what we were talking about. I was just counting strokes, trying to get through the swim without having a full-on panic attack. So this makes total sense to me because we had arrived at the lake on a Monday, and this was our first weekend at the lake. And I don't know about up here, wherever you are, but in Texas, weekend lake means be careful. It means, we're not gonna tube or jet ski or do anything like that till it's the weekday again because there's too much drinking and boating. So we'd had this long talk and fallen asleep having this talk, and so I could see why he had this dream. And so I looked at him and I thought, here we are, in this perfect shame storm. 2 people who've loved each other for a quarter of a century. What is the number 1 shame trigger for women? Appearance and body image. Still. Like, we've not come a long way, and don't call us baby. It's still appearance and body image. Like, it's still there. What's the number 1 shame trigger for men? Thoughts? Appearance of weakness. So I look at Steve, what I often tell people is, you show me a man who can sit with a woman in real fear and vulnerability and not try to fix it for her. I will show you a man who's done his work around vulnerability. You show me a woman who can sit with a man in real fear and vulnerability, and I will show you a woman who's done her own work and doesn't derive her status or power from that man. So here we are, treading water, and I look at him and I say, I'm so grateful you told me the truth about this. Thank you. And he looked back at me and he said, bull. Editing, bull. And I was like, what? And he goes, just bull. Don't quote your research to me about shame. Don't quote your research to me about vulnerability. Bull. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, you know what you want? You want the guy who, when the boat comes, he takes all 5 of the kids and throws them to the shore and swims so fast that he's there to catch them when they land, and then looks across at you, across the water, and goes, babe, I've got this, don't worry. That's what you want. And I had to take a really deep breath, because I wish I could tell you that for men, the biggest perpetrator of shame is other men and coaches and dads and terrible friends. The number one perpetrator of shame with men is women. And so I had to look at Steve and say the truth, which was 10 years ago, if you would have said this to me, I would have known exactly what to say back and I would have said it. But 2, 3, 4, 5 days later, when you least expected it, when you looked at me and said, hey, I'm gonna take the kids tubing today, I may have looked back at you out of my own fear and insecurity and said, are you sure you're feeling okay about that? And how do y'all think that would have felt for Steve? How many of you have ever shared something vulnerable with someone and then had that person use it back? What does that feel like? To me, that's an incredibly unholy act. When someone shares something sacred and true about themselves and we use it. But I think we've all done it, and I think, unfortunately, we mostly do that with people we care about the most. I told him 5 years ago, if you would have shared it with me, I would have been scared. I don't know if I would have said the right thing, but I would have understood. Today, when I look at you, here's what I know for the truth. This is all I know to be true. You and I are all we have. And I'm so grateful that we can have these conversations, because the story I'm making up puts our marriage in trouble, and the story you're telling yourself puts our marriage in trouble. And I'm so grateful that we can look at each other and say, here's what scares me, here's what I'm afraid of, here's what is not working, because we're all we have. When we think about what it is that we want in our lives, as leaders, as partners, as parents, as friends, as community members, I know what we want. I know it because I'm you, first and foremost. We're all the same. And I know because I study it, we want more love, more intimacy, more belonging, more joy. The only path to those things is more vulnerability. We have to show up and let ourselves be seen by each other, and to be known by each other in order to be connected to each other. For me, that was an amazing revelatory moment in my marriage. I mean, we got out, he snapped me on the butt with a towel, and he said, P.S., you still rock the Speedo. It was incredible. But here's what was hard about that moment. When we got home, I was like, oh, all those poor married suckers that don't have this figured out. I mean, the very next fight we got into was a total showdown. I was like, I need the water from Lake Travis. I should have brought some home in a mason jar. Like, what is happening? Like, what happened to that incredible moment where we looked at each other and we told each other about the stories we were making up? Do you know why that line is so important? Do you know why it kept coming up in the research? Because our brain is neurobiologically hardwired in the instant something difficult happens. A crappy comment from a coworker, a terrible look from your kid's teacher, a conflict at work, a failure, a disappointment, a heartbreak. Our brain is wired to make up a story about what's happening. Our brain recognizes the narrative pattern of story. It recognizes beginning, middle, end. And if we can give our brain a story in that second, when something hard happens, it rewards us chemically. It thanks us. It says, oh, a little dopamine, here you go. You've got it. Here's the problem about how the brain is wired. It rewards us whether the story is accurate or not. How many of you in here, and I really expect to see a show of hands, and I can outweigh you uncomfortably for long periods of time. How many of you in here have ever gotten in a conflict as a leader? And the minute that conflict is over, you have made up an entire story about what happened. How many of you have ever done that? Show of hands. Right, we do that. And you know the stories we make up have good guys, bad guys, dangerous people, safe people. You know what they call in research a story that has limited data points that we fill in with our values and ideals? In research, that's the definition of a conspiracy. A conspiracy is limited data points filled in with values and ideals. So we make up these stories. And how many of us work off these stories for hours, months? All of us. So for me, getting home, I was like, what happened that was so magical in that moment? And I didn't know until a year after that. I missed a flight, and I was in the airport shop, and I saw a magazine. I saw one of my favorite magazines, Fast Company, and it had, I thought, Eric Clapton on the front of it. And I was like, Eric Clapton and Fast Company, awesome, I'm gonna get that. So I tuck it in my bag, I get on my flight, I pull it out, and it's not Eric Clapton. It's Ed Catmull. In a very rock and roll picture taken by Fast Company. Now, I have to say, yeah, you might be like, huh? Except that I just had an article come out with Fast Company where they did that rock and roll photography of me. I don't look like me either. So I was like, what is this? And I started reading. I read about Creativity Inc. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm obsessed. We have the same publisher. I called my publisher and I was like, hey, I really want to interview Ed about my book. And they're like, let's call him. And so they call and Ed's like, we're big fans of Brené's work. Can she come and spend the day with us? And I was like, can I come and spend the day? Like, will it be too much if I dress up like Jessie from Toy Story? I'm like, yes, I can come spend the day with you. So I go spend the day at Pixar working with all of their leadership, working with a film team that was working on a film where they were kind of stuck and working things out, talking with their leadership, their producers, their writers. And we're all having lunch. And I'm sitting next to Ed, and we're talking about the middle space. How many of you know the middle space? When you start something and you're too far in to turn around, but you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel yet. Y'all know that space? Every new project, I have a company, but we're also in the middle of a startup right now, which is so stressful, and we are in the dark middle space. In the military, they call it the point of no return. You don't have enough fuel to go back to the airstrip where you left, you can only go forward. And so we were talking about that in terms of creativity and leadership and that dark space. To me, that dark space, what people do in that middle space is what separates leaders from non-leaders. Who you are in that space where you can't see in front of you and you're not sure and you're pretty alone, that's where leadership is born. That's when courage is forged. And you know the hardest place about that space is you can go into it 500 times in the course of your career. It doesn't change the fact that it's still lonely and hard. The only thing that experience gives us is a little bit of grace that whispers, you've done this before, you can do this, that's it. So we were talking about that, and we were talking about story and story acts. Act 1, the character is called to adventure and something hard happens. Act 2, the dark space, the character tries every convenient and easy way possible to resolve the challenge until the very end of Act 2, when the character realizes what it's going to actually take to get it done. Act 3, the character gets it done. So I'm fascinated by this because I'm studying story, I'm writing strong, so I get home and I think about the Pixar process and I'm like, Lake Travis, Act 1, we're swimming. I reach out, he blows me off. Inciting incident. Act 2. Act 2. What is Act 2? Because Act 3 is he snaps me on the butt with a towel. And I don't know about you, but I prefer to go from Act 1 to Act 3. I'm not a huge fan of Act 2. So I start thinking about what happened in the middle of that story that I don't understand. What happened? Where did it happen? And what I realized was the swim back to the dock for me is where Act 2 completely unraveled. It's where everything happened. I started thinking about how does this story end if I don't change things? It ends with me going into payback mode, and I'm so good at payback. How many of you are good at payback? How many of you are good at self-righteousness? Oh my God, I'm so good. If it ever turns out to be a good thing, take a class with me. Because I'm really good at better than, because better than is just the same, the other side of that coin is not good enough. So I start thinking about that swim back, and what happened on that swim back was absolutely what I had learned from Rising Strong. When something difficult happens, the men and women who can get back up on their feet and be even braver after adversity have very clear things in common. They have a very clear process in common. I call it the reckoning, the rumble, and the revolution. The very first thing that men and women do who can get up after a fall is they absolutely reckon with emotion. These are the men and women who can say, something has hooked me, I'm triggered, I don't know what's going on, but I'm willing to get curious about it. And that sounds so easy, but how many of you really get curious about what you're feeling? I don't know about you, but I'm like, I have an agenda this long for the next meeting. I've got 55 emails. I've got to look at bank statements and budgets. I don't have time to concentrate on my feelings right now. I've got to get crap done. How many of you resonate with that? Yes or no? If you asked me, what do transformational leaders share in common? Here's what I would tell you. And this is 13 years of research, 150,000 pieces of data, interviews with some of the most transformational CEOs I've ever met in my life across the globe. Number one, they do discomfort. I've never met a powerful leader who was not okay with discomfort. Real discomfort. Number two, they have absolute emotional awareness about their own life and emotional awareness about the people that work around them. And you've heard it all day, right? How many times do you think we've heard the word emotion from this stage today? You can't ignore it. We're not thinking beings who sometimes feel. We are emotional people who sometimes think. Yeah. And emotion dictates behavior. You want to do culture change, you want to see behavior change with the people you lead, you better speak to their emotions. Because if you try to speak to their cognitions, the way they think, or their behaviors, before you speak to their emotions, you will change nothing. That is not the way we're wired. So the first thing we have to do is just recognize, man, something is going on. I am emotionally hooked around something. Maybe it's because I want to punch a hole in the sheetrock. Maybe it's because I want Oreos. Maybe it's because I've got a loop in my head. But something's got me hooked, and I'm willing to get curious about it. Curiosity and lines of inquiry are the greatest tools for leaders. I have never once had a conflict as a leader that I couldn't work out by sitting across from someone and saying, help me understand. Curiosity is currency of the realm in leadership. So we got to get curious. The second thing, we have to rumble with emotion. On that swim back, for me, I was like, okay, what is happening? I'm in a total shame storm. I don't know whether to be mean to him, to start crying. I don't know whether he's, I don't know what's happening. But we have to rumble with emotion. We have to be willing to walk in and get brave talking about discomfort. Let me give you a great example. I'm doing a talk at a Fortune 50 company on the West Coast. I'm in the audience while the CEO is doing an opening Q&A. His team was very insistent that they vet the questions from the audience, and he said, no, just give me the questions. Give me the questions straight from the audience. They were tough questions. I was squirming in my seat, and people would say, so this program that you had a couple years ago, we all loved it, but you canceled it. Will you consider bringing it back? 9 out of 10 leaders I've worked with would say, that's a great idea, thank you for sharing it, we'll consider bringing it back. No, No, I don't think so. It's not cost effective, it really doesn't serve our mission, we can't make that work. Thank you, next. But it was question after question like that, and answer after answer like that. I was like, I do not want to go on behind this guy. These people are so pissed off. And at the end, he took 20 questions. 10 of them were like, I don't even understand your question. Thank you. And so at the end, everyone in the audience jumped to their feet and started clapping. And I looked over at the woman sitting next to me, and I was like, what's happening? And she said, oh, yeah, it's weird. In our culture, we clap for the truth. Right, we clap for the truth. But that's a leader who does discomfort. I don't know about you, but I would have been like, oh, that's an awesome question. Can somebody take a note on that? We should look into that. Okay, thanks. Okay. Yes or no? Maybe you wouldn't have made the heart, but I guarantee you have your own version of the hustle, right? Better to send a memo a month later. Discomfort, we've got to rumble with what's true and hard. That's what leaders do. And I said this on this stage last time I was here, and I'll say it again. As leaders, you can choose courage or you can choose comfort. You cannot have both. You've got to choose. The last thing in the reckoning, okay, something's got me triggered, let me look into it. I'm not gonna blow it off, I'm not gonna steamroll over it, I'm not gonna rage at my kids when I get home, I'm gonna actually look at what's bothering me. Second, I'm willing to rumble with hard topics, trust, shame, vulnerability, generosity, truth-telling. I'm willing to be uncomfortable. The last thing is the revolution. When this becomes a practice in your life, at home, at work. For us, we do every check-in with my leadership team. What do you need to rumble today? That's our check-in every time we meet. What do you need to rumble today? Someone might say, I'm exhausted, I was up last night trying to finish this. I just need people to rumble gently. But when you work with me, we do discomfort. That's our job, and that's what the people who we serve ultimately and the people who work for us expect us to do the hard stuff. All of these stories that we make up, all the things that are not true, all the things that are true, our worthiness as people live inside these stories. When we pretend that the hard things are not happening, when we deny the story, it defines us. When we own the story, we get to write the ending. But you don't, as a leader, get to write an ending to a story you don't own. An organizational story, a personal story, a professional story, the hard, the good, and the stories that we keep making up every day are not true. So as a leader, do you have the courage when someone walks out of your office after a conflict to go find her or him and say, hey, things were heated when you left today, and I'm making up that you're really upset about the new budget versions. I want to get clear with you about what's happening. God, thanks for following up with me. I'm not upset about the budget versions at all. Really what's happening is my daughter has soccer tryouts today. She hurt her foot already. I'm just really worried, but thanks for following up. How much courage does it take to follow up with someone and say, hey, look, the story I'm telling myself about what just happened is this. Let's get clear. That's leadership. Courage is uncomfortable. That's why it's rare. The bravest among us will always be the most brokenhearted because we had the courage to love. Those of us who have the courage to engage and care will always know disappointment. And those of us who are willing to be innovative and creative and try new things will always know failure. That's the way it works. The physics of vulnerability is very straightforward. It's almost as, even though it's emotion, it's almost as straightforward as physics itself. If you are brave enough, often enough, you are going to fail. And what I can tell you from my work and my life is there is nothing more dangerous to the critics and the cynics and the fearmongers than those of us who are willing to fail. We're willing to know heartbreak. We're willing to know disappointment because we've learned how to get back up. So that's my wish for all of us, that we can find a way to lean into each other and find a way back up, because I think the risk is worth it. Thank y'all so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.